College football nerds here talking our top 10 again, and we've dropped my pen. We've been loving that y'all been giving us your top 10s in the comments. Please continue to do that, and we will mix it up with you there. Last week we did something a little different where we gave our top 10 just out the gate, didn't go one by one, give our whole top 10, and then had a discussion off of that. We really liked that, so we're going to do it again. Y'all let us know if you like that format. Or if you prefer us to unveil them one by one and discuss each one in detail late at night on a Sunday night and we get tired. But we'll do it. If you like it, we'll do it. Josh, here's mine, and then you can give me yours, and then we can get into the discussion. I've got Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Clemson, Florida, BYU, Cincinnati, Indiana, and Georgia. And now that I remember, we talked about this, and it's interesting because you talked me out of Cincinnati being where they were, and I have Cincinnati at 10 and not at 8. So it'll show in the graphic. I read it off what I wrote, and then we talked in the notes, and Josh talked me out of Cincinnati at 8. So, Josh, give me your top 10, and then we'll get into it.
My top 10 is Alabama 1, Ohio State 2, Texas A&M 3, Florida 4, Notre Dame 5. I can already see eyebrows being raised. Clemson 6, Wisconsin 7, BYU 8, Georgia 9, Cincinnati 10. No, I'm not happy with it either.
I've got Notre Dame 3. I don't think anybody's mad about Alabama being number 1. Some Notre Dame fans are going to be mad. They're going to say, hey, we beat the number 1 team in the country. Shouldn't we be number 1? And I'll say 2015 Ole Miss beat Alabama, and nobody put 2015 Ole Miss number 1 after that. I don't think Clemson is the number 1 team in the country right now. Based on what I saw and have seen throughout the course of this year, I would not pick them to beat Alabama or Ohio State on a neutral field. Also, remember, Alabama has a win over a healthy Georgia before they got just battered, and has a win over the Texas A&M team, beat the crap out of Texas A&M, who did beat Florida. So they have a tougher schedule so far played and have a tougher schedule to go. I've got Notre Dame at 3. You don't. So why don't we start there with your discussion of what you're thinking?
It's pretty simple. It's trying to figure out where that Alabama, Texas A&M, Florida triangle sits. Both of us are of the opinion that you can't put Florida ahead of A&M. And I think the AP poll is doing that right now. I think that's annoying. Sorry, not the AP poll. The coaches poll has Florida ahead of A&M. The AP poll actually is A&M ahead, which is the right way to do it. A&M beat Florida. A&M's only losses to Alabama. I don't think Florida can jump A&M just because they beat Georgia. Now, there's a little bit of a transitive property there, and that problem extends to the Notre Dame-Clemson discussion. Because if I want to put A&M ahead of Florida because I say if they play, then A&M would win, and I can't say A&M would do any different, how do I compare them to a Notre Dame or a Clemson? Notre Dame is undefeated. My thinking is, I think A&M and Florida right now, I would pick them to beat Notre Dame. And if they had Clemson's schedule, I say like, how would you do with your opponent's schedule? I think A&M and Florida with Clemson's schedule, more likely than not, does beat Notre Dame and is actually undefeated right now. They both only have 1 loss, so that's not a far-fetched statement. Given that, that's why I have them over Notre Dame. And the weird thing here I will say is I think Clemson probably beats A&M or Florida. Just like I think, quite frankly, Clemson is more likely than not would beat Notre Dame in a rematch today. Now, that's a little iffy due to Clemson's situation, but that's my logic, is I think A&M and Florida would likely beat Notre Dame, and if A&M and Florida had Clemson's schedule, they would be undefeated outside Notre Dame and more likely than not beat Notre Dame. So to me, that's why A&M and Florida end up ahead of the Notre Dame-Clemson pair.
Yeah, and no disrespect to Florida, because we just did our review of that Georgia game. We're really high on them. They're a playoff contender. We even like them certain playoff matchups. But look, Texas A&M beat Florida. If you're giving Florida in the coaches poll a lot of credit for beating a highly ranked Georgia, you got to give Texas A&M credit for beating a highly ranked Florida. Like, that's a better win. Clearly, Texas A&M's win over Florida is better than Florida's win over Georgia at this point. So there's also the fact that they both played South Carolina, and Texas A&M just murdered South Carolina. It was a murdering. And South Carolina was not ever going to beat Florida, but it was a much closer game, especially what South Carolina did offensively against Florida versus Texas A&M. You could argue that they have quit, but I would then go back to the fact that Florida not only lost to Texas A&M, but Texas A&M was statistically a good bit ahead of Florida in that game. Okay, enough. I know Texas A&M fans. It's a running joke now. They're loving us. They're coming back. They're just watching the top 10. That's it, just so they can come and hear us talk about their team. Okay, so for me, I've got Clemson down behind Texas A&M, ahead of Florida. It's not entirely fair because I think if Florida played Clemson last night, Florida would have beaten them. What I don't know is who Clemson is with those healthy defensive players and with Trevor Lawrence back. But the thing is, we're going to see that at the end of the season. So there's some time there. But right now, that's in the hypothetical game. For me, the one that's solid and has moved up and is pretty solid is BYU. In my mind, BYU has separated themselves from the G5 standpoint of the two G5s that are being ranked, separated themselves because they're killing people and they have an offense. So jump down to your Cincinnati because we both have them at 10 and talk about why they're not higher for either of us.
You watch the Georgia game and you think, man, like Georgia's offense is terrible. Cincinnati's offense was really good in terms of yardage against Houston. They put up 38 points. But Cincinnati passed for 162 yards on 27 attempts, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. 6 yards per attempt in that game. Cincinnati's quarterback play this year has just not been good. They were 6 yards per attempt against Southern Miss. They were 5.5 yards per attempt against South Florida. Overall, they were 5.6 yards per attempt against Houston. It's not a very dynamic offense. They're surviving by being able to run the ball down the throat against inferior teams. That will not translate against high-end defenses. We say that all the time. A high-end defense, if they can focus on the run, will stop it. Period. You do not see in modern football, even in old school football, right? That was the deal. You could run it down and you could win a game running the ball, but you did that in an era where you could score 20 to 30 points and win. Cincinnati cannot beat a team that is going to score more than 30 points and has a good defense because they can't pass. So that's why I have Cincinnati where they do, because despite everybody seeing Georgia get blown out, I think people miss the fact that Cincinnati's offense in their win was as inept passing the ball as Georgia was in their loss.
I've still got Georgia in my top 10. There's going to be some Miami fans that complain, but look, you needed to pull one out of the fire to beat NC State. That's not good. NC State's not a good football team this year. Miami is a top 15, not top 10 team in my mind, at least not right now. I've got Georgia at 10. I think that they would beat most anybody behind them, especially if they were healthy. Right now, they missed both their safeties in this game against Florida. We're down to their third string wide receiver at one position. I think a Georgia over the course of the season is going to average out to be a better team than they are. The one that I think we really disagree on is I've got Indiana in my top 10. You've got Wisconsin in yours. For me, if you're ranking Wisconsin and they've only played one game this year, you're almost, Josh, going against the thing that you did where you didn't want to rank Big Ten teams because they weren't playing week in and week out while other teams are losing all around them. I think you're kind of doing that. But I want you to talk a little bit about, maybe you can answer that charge, but also about why I might be overrating Indiana. I thought, they handled business against Michigan, but maybe you're not as high on them. So to wrap it up, maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, obviously Wisconsin is the trouble point. I just kind of left them there. I don't know what to do with them, and I especially don't because it's becoming obvious Illinois is also a really bad team, or likely is. Indiana against Michigan, it's an interesting game because they won that 38-21, but Penix passed for 6.8 yards per attempt, and they ran the ball for 3.1 yards per carry. I think Indiana is fool's gold. I think Michigan is a lot worse than we anticipated. That Michigan game was more than anything, it was controlled by the fact that Michigan had a couple inopportune turnovers. But Michigan can't run the ball. And I give Indiana credit for having a great run defense, but Michigan passed it for 10 yards per attempt in that game. Um, I don't. I'm not sold. Indiana reproduces it a lot. That production a lot, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the bad corner play and a lot of other issues. And outside that, Penn State now clearly looks like they are not all that. I think Rutgers being a good team for a 16-point win doesn't mean a whole lot. I don't think Indiana's going to beat Ohio State. I don't think Indiana's going to beat Wisconsin. And I'll go ahead and say it. I think Indiana's going to drop one of the two between Maryland and Purdue at this point. So I know we're saying about how they did today, but I don't think beating Penn State or Michigan is nearly what we thought it was. I don't think being a 3-0 against the schedule is that big of a deal. I do think Indiana is probably a top 15, top 20 team. I just don't think they're top 10, and I think that's going to bear out by the end of the year. They're going to be ranked, but not terribly highly ranked.
Man, and just give me 30 seconds on maybe what this says about the Big Ten. If what you say is true, that blowing out Michigan and beating Penn State is not that big of a deal, I mean, what does that say about the Big Ten?
Well, the first thing is the school that you think I'm putting forward unfairly. I think Wisconsin is actually going to prove to be one of the better teams in the Big Ten. And look, we've said this all year. There are way too many G5 teams in this list. Teams like Marshall that have been sitting in that list of the top 25. People are losing track of the Iowas and the Marylands and these teams with one or two losses in the SEC like Auburn. I don't think they're bad. I think they would beat most of the G5s in the middle, but we kind of see the teams that are in that mid-tier of all the conferences beating each other up, and we just assume they're all terrible because they've got 500-ish records. I don't think that's true. I'm just saying that with Indiana in particular, I actually think Indiana is going to end up being about average in the Big Ten. I do think Wisconsin's going to be on up there. You've got to give some credit at this point for Northwestern, who has an undefeated record. I'm not sure how good they're going to end up being. But like I said, I don't think Iowa's necessarily a bad team. And I'll tell you another thing I caught real flack for. I don't know that Nebraska is that bad. And I don't know if Indiana even beats a Nebraska right now. So I don't think the Big Ten is that bad. I think there's a pretty rough middle, and I know I went way over 30 seconds, but it required it. I think you've got an elite team in Ohio State. I think you're going to end up with a very high team in Wisconsin. Maybe a sneaky good team in Northwestern or Maryland, or somebody's going to end up in that upper tier. But don't think just because these, like we said this a couple weeks ago, most of the teams in the Big Ten will have to have a losing record mathematically, just because the way it's all going to play out, or at least be 500 or worse. Don't let that cloud your head and just think, well, just because Michigan State's 1-2, they have to be awful. Or just because Michigan's 1-2 or Iowa's 1-2. A lot of these teams are actually going to be pretty good. And if they played the G5 teams in that top 25 ranking, they would win most of those games.
You made a good point about Nebraska, and we're pretty good on this show about not overreacting to teams getting blown out by elites. I think fans are so used to real parity that when they see a team lose, like A&M, I think lost like 52-24 this year to Alabama. They see that and they completely dismiss the losing team as being terrible. But understanding that the top 3 or 4 teams now, the way college football is, they're so good that you could lose by 30 points to Ohio State and turn around and go in a normal year 8-4, 9-3, still be a good team. It's just you hit these breaking points of eliteness against even good teams, and they're going to blow them out. It happens. We've seen it happen with Alabama for a while now. Ohio State's doing it too. Clemson has done it in the past. So it doesn't surprise me at all. All right, y'all, let us know in the comments what you think about this week's top 10. What would we do? What would you do with these Big Ten teams? And are we crazy for not having Notre Dame 1 or 2? Are you going to give them credit for that win more than anything else? Remember, they did beat Louisville 12-7. I'm going to hammer that home all year. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week.